So let's move ahead with the last panel of the day. We will talk about data. Remember that all of you here physically, but all of you that are following us online, you can put your questions by using the chat next to the streaming video in the platform or the app whenever you want. And then we can pick them up during the panel. Okay. I will leave the floor right now to Cristina Vescos. She's the Managing Director of EIT Health Spain, and she will manage this panel. So, Cristina, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks the organization for inviting me also to chair this amazing panel. I think it was very intelligent of the organization to put the best panel at the end. So we hope you will enjoy all. I mean, the previous one was excellent, but this one is going to be surely better. So as said before, so my name is Cristina Vescos. I'm the director of EIT Health in Spain. For those who don't know what this is the European Institute of Technology and Innovation, and I mean, our purpose really is to accelerate the innovations made in Europe and bring them to the market and to the patients, as is the motto of today, as soon as possible. So I have the pleasure to chair this amazing panel. So let me just first introduce all the panelists. So one by one, I think we will follow a bit the picture, if you all agree. So first in the picture is Jordi Piera. Please welcome to the floor. Jordi, I mean, I know him from a long trajectory, especially in integrated care and digital health in Europe. His background in computer science and health economy, and now the director of the digital health strategy of the Catalan Ministry of Health. So please join us. Thank you. Then second person we have here is Paul Burgraph, if I pronounce it correctly, so CEO of Thryve, and also coming from Germany. So I think it's very interesting that we have people from Berlin also here at the hub and joining also the experience with COVID and German data. I need to check a bit on your experience at Zurich University also, and mainly background in let's say engineering and economics too. So thank you joining us here for the panel. Third one, I'll just follow here, Javier de Oca, CEO of Iomed. It will bring us a bit of the business side of the digital health. And we'll hear also about what Iomed is really doing in what is access to data and what we can use of it. So thank you for joining, Javier. And the last one, but not least, is Emma Albacar. So is now European Data Management Director of Veristat with a very, very long trajectory in CRO. And we'll talk about also clinical research and how data is changing that floor. So thank you, please join us. And I think it's also nice to have different backgrounds and also a very varied panel. So we'll talk about data. We will assume we have data. I mean, I think that's not the question, I think, in 2021, but what we do with the data. No? I'll give the floor first, if you want, to Paul, because I think it's important that we learn about the experience, what Thryve and Germany has done with the experience of COVID. And so please, let's start with that.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. So I'm the co-founder and the CEO of Thryve. And I will start with a story, basically, that happened last year at the very end of February. And back then, it was in the news that there might be a new virus entering the world. We didn't know whether it would be dangerous, would not be dangerous. And so the epidemiologists in Germany asked themselves the question, where can we get the data to actually find out more about the virus and maybe the spread of the virus? And back then, already, we had the lab infrastructure. We had very early on the PCR tests to find out. But the main technology that linked the German Center of Disease Control to all the labs and the local health authorities is a technology. But that technology is the telefax. That's the dominating technology in Germany to link that. And so there was a big fear that there might be a too long chain. So whenever a new outbreak happens, it takes a while until the lab results are there. It also takes a while until people actually know that they might have symptoms and they go to the lab. That all adds up. And then it takes even more, and there's many problems in using the telefax technology in an outbreak of an epidemic. So the main question was, what alternative sources of data do we have? And when we talk about digital health, we talk a lot about the new data sources. Yes, we will have electronic health records. Yes, we will have a lot of hospital data, and we develop more and more interfaces. But in Germany, it was not ready. And it's going quite slow. So there was one other idea, and that is that patients already measure their health very frequently. Most of us, we use smartphones. And every smartphone, they have, for example, some information about your geolocation. If we have the geolocation, we also have the information about the weather at this place. We have your step count, that we can see how often you move around different places. And as an epidemic is also a social phenomenon, that's important data. But even more important than that, in Germany, more than 20% of the people already use smartwatches and fitness trackers. And those devices, they measure not only the steps during the day, but also the sleep. And they also measure, in many occasions, the resting heart rate throughout the night. Many devices measure that 1,440 times per day. So there's an enormous amount of data that is already generated by the patient. And we proposed, let's use the data, because there's quite some evidence that infectious diseases leave a certain pattern in those data streams. And so we sat together with the epidemiologists and discussed whether this might be of use to shorten the time from a spread of the virus in a certain area and the time that the German Center of Disease Control has the first knowledge that something is changing. And so it was in early March last year that we sat together and did the first drawings about how that could be. And it was in early April that we launched in Germany the data donation app. This is a citizen science project, so there's no compensation for the participants. There's no money. They don't even see the results of the digital COVID tests that we perform them. They just said that I want to help the government to have a better picture of the situation. We want to support the researchers. And that was the only motivation for what we kind of underestimated the response. We thought that might be a couple of thousand that might contribute, but within 4 hours, there was more than 400,000 people connecting with that app. And back then, the Google Play Store broke down because the app was not known before and could not be found. Google Fit broke down because there was too much data drawn from it. The website broke down. Many things went wrong. But we were able to recover all the data in a couple of days. And from that moment on, we were able to look for the patterns. And when we say that, what does data tell us? There's two aspects of the story. The one aspect is that the data is already out there. Many patients, they buy smart devices. They buy smartphones, they buy wearables. And in those devices, they already, because they like it, and they like the service, and they like the experience, they already measure what we need in many occasions. And this is a very nice start. And the second aspect is that this data, albeit recorded by patients, and they can make many mistakes. They can put the variable in the wrong way. They might forget it in a certain night. So it's different in the quality from what we record in a hospital. But also, this data is very, very rich. We have a very high frequency of measurements, and we have a lot of patients. And there's a very specific pattern in terms of respiratory infections, and that is when a patient gets infected, contrary to what we might think, the resting heart rate drops. But then, after only a day or two, it rises very sharply on a super high level. And especially when people have, for example, fever, 1 degree of fever equals to 8.5 beats per minute more of heart rate. And that's pretty constant in young people, old people, sick people, healthy people. It's a very, very solid, robust mechanism because the body needs the energy to heat the body. And so the heart needs to produce more, or to supply more oxygen to the muscles to heat the body. So we see then, when the symptoms start setting in and the body starts to fight against the virus, that the resting heart rate goes up. And it stays there. It stays there for a long time. At the same time, for example, the step count drops. People don't move. They feel sick. They don't want to go out. They feel bad. They don't walk around. Even if some people don't walk around on a rainy day, but then the next day they start walking again. And when they have strong symptoms, they don't do that anymore. And we don't need to ask the patients. The data is already there. And also the sleep changes. People sleep longer because they want to recover. And this is a very, very distinctive pattern that we can see. And in the end, there were more than 540,000 people that connected their wearable device in this program, in this data donation app, without having any benefit than the idea of helping others to understand the epidemic. And the nice story that we get from this project is that the data is already there. Patients like to record it. And if we put the patients first, the passive sensing, I guess, is one of the main elements that can enable us to basically move healthcare more outside of the hospital.
Thank you, Paul. I mean, what you really highlight is the importance of all kind of data. Now, we were used to very structured medical data, and suddenly we are more and more aware that there are other data that can be even more relevant than what is the structural clinical symptoms. So it's really the data that we have linked to the health outcomes. How can we make use of all the data that we have? No? That's a bit the question. I want to, maybe, Jordi, if you want to start with that part. And we'll
yeah, well, that's a very good question and a complex one. I mean, here we have in Catalonia a very long tradition of sharing health-related information, the one that you collect at healthcare facilities. Since year 2007, we've been sharing medical records all across the public sector through interoperability. And all this information is accessible by all providers within the public sector. We have, well, the platform is called the Shared Electronic Health Record of Catalonia. In there we have discharge reports. We will have, well, we have laboratory results, X-ray imaging, all that sort of thing. Summaries, basically, of the information. We have it in there. We started with non-structured information back in year 2007, and step by step, by taking advantage of the bilateral contractual relationship that the Catalan NHS, so to say, has with every other provider, we force them to keep moving towards more structured information. The problem that we have, and I guess it's everywhere else the same, is that the main data source, health-related data sources, I would say, are the medical records. And all of those are storing the information in different proprietary formats. Here in Catalonia, only we have in specialized care 29 different vendors, each of them with their own data model. And well, it's very costly for us to maintain gathering this information. We built on interoperability, and it's been, well, I mean, we are very happy or pretty happy with it, and it has helped a lot the continuity of care. We think that this approach, it's not the one that we should be following. We think that data is buried in plenty of different silos of information, being the medical record the biggest one, but in a hospital, and a very big hospital, tertiary hospital, according to our calculations, there are between 800 and 1,000 different silos of patient-related information. So we say that data is not following the patient because it's very difficult for us to gather all these silos into a single one. And once we want to take systematic advantage of all this data that is in there, we're mentioning that data is there, but yeah, well, we spend 80% of the time in a project similar to the one that Paul has been explaining, cleaning the data and making some rationale out of it. That's even more complicated once we gather real world data, he was explaining. So really here the challenge is, yeah, trying to find a common language for these data models, for these clinical data models that we want to exchange and take advantage of. Because the usage of this data set should be not just for one time or for one algorithm or for one physician consultation. I mean, we should be able to process these data sets hundreds, thousands of times. I mean, they should be available in there for life, not just for since before you are born until you die, but then for your successors, or it should be there, and we should try to homogenize this. We have a proposal to do so, and maybe you have heard of it. It's not us only the ones that are moving towards this. We want to standardize these clinical data models following a standard, an open standard that has been in there for many years, that some regions or places in the world have already adopted. We have the experience of this, I don't know, the city of Moscow. We have the guys in Karolinska. From the 5 vendors of EMRs in the Nordic countries, 4 of them implement this standard, and it's called OpenER, Open Electronic Health Record. And we think that with this, we will be really able to unlock all this power of data, be able to really link real-world data with health outcomes, and also unlock the door for innovation, because right now, all these startups, and that's a good place to speak about them, that are trying to go into a hospital and sell their technology, they need to agree every time on a different integration with the system, because basically the data inputs or the data sources are different. Of course, we have a lot of people against us, the ones that have, or the big vendors of EMRs, because of course they have their proprietary models and they don't want to change them. But, well, we truly think that that's the way to move forwards, and we are building our new EHR on that. And I think that this will be what will be really able to, well, allow us to really link health outcomes and have better health results for patients.
Yeah. So you mentioned open EHR. I think the first time I heard about it, I was living in the Netherlands. I don't know exactly which year, but I left the Netherlands in 2006, so that was a long time ago. But it's true that it has taken so long really to go through that process in the mindset of administration and the official data keepers. No? But I think, as Paul was saying, we need a different level of speed now. We need agility, and I think I'm going to give the word now to Javier to see what can companies like Iomed help in this idea of I mean, we have certain data. We need to be able to access different structures, different kind of data, and we have to do it not in 20 years, but really now. So.
Precisely, and thanks for that. I'm very glad that Jordi was introducing the problem of standardizing data and the different data sources and how that format actually hurts innovation and hurts the process of generating new solutions for patients. That's a very important or a very big problem for hospitals. Obviously, where someone has a problem, we always see an opportunity, and that's exactly where we are working at. So. We see exactly the same problem that Jordi was describing, but what we are trying to do here is expanding the reach of the solution beyond, let's say, beyond the connection or beyond the interoperability of all the data, and merging into what we call the unstructured side of data. And that is important because, as Jordi was very correctly mentioning, most of the information is collected in EHRs, in electronic health records, within hospitals. And even within those systems, even in very advanced ones, we still have a very important part that is unstructured, which means it's stored in a text format. There's very little that we can do with that in terms of purely analytics and using that information for actually doing something meaningful. It's text that we can just read through, or we can consume it, but we cannot use it for proper analytics. And I'm thinking about innovation, I'm thinking about research, I'm thinking about studies, trials. Probably we'll hear about clinical trials in a moment. I'm thinking about helping on patient diagnosis, identifying, helping identify patients with rare diseases, and so on. So I'm thinking really about a lot of potential uses, and at the beginning we were discussing on potential uses for the data. There's a lot to be done, but we need the data. Now we have a lot of that, but most of it is still unstructured. Now our approach to that is connecting to hospitals like Jordi was describing, but in our case, focusing on the text, so focusing on the unstructured bit of the electronic health records, and transforming it into structured information that follows standards again, so follows standard ontologies, standard data models. In our case, we're using also OMOP as a data model. We're using ontologies such as SNOMED, ICD-10, so we're using really internationally recognized standards. The idea at the end of the day is overcoming barriers such as how clinicians write in a given hospitals, what language they use. It's a very good place to speak about that. Do they speak in Catalan? Do they write in Catalan? Do they write in Spanish? Do we want to go to Germany and write in German? Now we want to overcome those barriers. We think that data needs to be way more universal than that. If you want to conduct a clinical trial and you want to involve patients from Germany, Spain, and Portugal, you will need to be able to use data that's been originally produced in Portuguese, Spanish, and German. Now we need to overcome that barrier. And the only way to do that is applying layers that process that information. And those layers, or the ones at least that we are introducing into the market, or we've been introducing into the market since 2017, is based on natural language processing, a technique that allows us to read, not us, but obviously our systems, to read into thousands and millions of medical records very quickly, and produce a data set that's completely usable, standard, that can be then used to action certain uses. And then about speed. Speed is crucial here. And speed is also very rare in health. It's very, very rare. Anyway, the moment we have standard information that is able to cross borders, that is able to break the barriers of language, that is able to break the silos within hospitals and outside of hospitals, that moment we've overcome a massive issue when using information. So that's critical to speed up innovation, to speed up research. And in this field, we're really glad to have really interesting results with key partners in different industries, obviously in the healthcare industry with several hospitals here in Catalonia and the rest of Spain, also abroad. Partners in the pharmaceutical industry, I see several of them I've seen them today here in the event. So we are really glad to start seeing the outcomes of this standardization in clinical research, in patient identification, and clinical trials, and so on. So things are moving on, things are happening, but we really need to break those barriers related to data in order to really make breakthroughs in that sense.
So thank you, Javier. I think, as Paul has said, I think patients or citizens are much more prepared really to donate now data and to collaborate with research, and we'll talk just now one moment with Emma about also clinical research and how, this data that patients are producing and citizens are producing and are willing to share, how we can really use them for clinical research, clinical trials with your experiences here.
Yeah, indeed. So here we have a huge potentiality on using this kind of data. First of all, as you said, Jordi and Javier, we need to structure the data, make sure that everything is the right standard, because there is a lot of interaction that can be done between the industry and the healthcare and health outcomes. So in order to make possible all this information that needs to be used for the clinical trials, I think it's critical to this. But I would like to add something into equation. It's also not only about the standards, but also we need regulations in place in order to make this happen, because now legal contracts, all the authorities need to be aligned with that in order to facilitate that. So agree also on the speed is now the moment. So I remember during COVID, now that Paul has also shared your experience during COVID, we were facing some challenges in order to collect data, proper data, in those obscure times during the hard pandemic in April, to get the right data to try to find not only a vaccine but also a possible treatment for the more severe patients. And it was challenging because the system seems not to be in place, and the data was not in place. It was quite challenging to get there. So I think if we establish the basis and we all together work, the public health, private industry, and all the organizations dedicated to the clinical research, we work together, we can achieve that and be faster on that movement. Because the future, I think, I foresee the future of the clinical trials, not only using this data for real-world evidence, late-phase studies, but also imagine the potentiality of using the existing data for clinical trials, so we allow patients to invest less time on the visits, physicians as well, investing less time on collecting data, because this data could be already clean and ready to be used.
So we have heard now, kind of the 4 positions, 4 challenges, and possible solutions. We know, patients are willing to donate the data. We need the data for any startup, any entrepreneurs needs to provide clinical evidence of their solution. How we facilitate that? The European Union is really advocating for data lakes. It's also part of the 18 component of the national, in Spain, the National Resilient Plan. Are data lakes the solution? I'm just going to throw it to the panel. You can start a more open discussion as you wish. Or
well, certainly, the use of data in this sense has to go through a certain or through some data lake similar solutions. We certainly need that. It's important to highlight that we need to preserve certain rules when establishing these data lakes, data warehouses, and so on. So it's not just about data standards and so on, but we need to preserve rules that guarantee patient data privacy. That's essential. That's basically the first thing we need to guarantee. But we also need to guarantee other things, such as who governs the data that's within that data lake. Who governs that? Who is the owner? Who's responsible for that data? Who answers when there is a breach? And all these steps need to be defined when speaking about data, about the concept of data lakes, which is obviously very, very wide. And there is a lot of different approaches that we can follow when onboarding the concept of data lakes. But in any case, we need to guarantee that certain levels of basic guarantees for patients and data owners is guaranteed in this sense. In our case, we work a lot with federated models that allow us to produce data lakes, let's say, in a combined and federated approach. This allows us to be able to reach a very wide amount of information without renouncing on the governance that has to be transferred, in our case, to our data partners, in this case, hospitals. So they will be always governing their own data, but the federated approach allows us to swiftly collect information from all those different data lakes that are, let's say, under the control of hospitals. And in this sense, it's an approach that allows us to guarantee governance, privacy, security to our partners. And it's a very important milestone, let's say, a very important cornerstone of our offering.
I'm going to be a bit provocative here. Of course, we have to protect the privacy of data. I think that is assumed as one of the rights of citizens in Europe, at least. But Aaron, we utilizing the patient and this protection just not to advance too often. Can we? As you say, the technology probably is there since a couple of years. And we are still discussing this topic even in the time that we have realized with COVID that we need to be faster. So just provocative question, is really the problem, the challenge, the data privacy, or we are using it as an excuse not to confront with the real need that we need to change how we store the data in order to facilitate that access for entrepreneurs, for innovation?
I guess data privacy is a prerequisite. Like people need to have trust, and data privacy needs to be a balance between what is needed to ensure the patient's health and to improve the healthcare system, and the privacy needs. And I guess there's also the concept that people can choose different levels of data protection. I don't believe in the data lake. I don't believe that there should be one central storage, but I believe that there should be always the technology to make data flow, and it's more about the interfaces. So, for example, when a patient onboards a specific program, let's say after a knee surgery, and the data that is maybe 1 year old about the activity and the agility of the patient would be needed, it would be nice that the patient could at that moment say, you can use my data from 2 years earlier, and you can have it in all the details, and somebody that doesn't have a knee surgery doesn't need to supply it to this specific partner. So I believe it should be very flexible. The patient should be able to customize the data needs, but we should make sure that all the different data silos have interfaces so that they can easily connect it when needed.
Yeah, so I mean, this is probably not so much about the rights, but having the right tools to access the data, no? That's, okay. I don't know, Jordi, if you want to
I mean, I think that, yeah, that the part of privacy, I mean, it's a requisite for us, as Paul was saying. I think that this is a must here in Europe, and it's what distinguishes us from the Chinese or from the Americans. And of course, they will advance faster than we do. I mean, for them and I mean, if you see what the Chinese are doing with the data of the population, they say that it's a public good and they are using it as such, and they are taking massive advantage of it. But well, I think that there's our nature. We cannot change it, and I think it's truly stopping us a bit. But well, I feel safe in that environment, other than other approaches that we see around the world. That's my point with that.
Yeah, I mean, we have to ensure definitely the European values in whatever innovation is developed here, but it's also in what is in the end adopted here. No, if we are probably too late in the development, we will adopt technologies that are not following this value anyway. So, so it's a bit.
The idea that Javier brought into the table about the federation of data lakes, or the federated learning environments, which is all these different lakes of information that follow a normalized data structure that, well, you contribute into the big community with your data, but your data does not flow from there, just stays at your place, and you decide which algorithms you plug in them. I mean, it's basically used in AI, natural language processing, and all this predictive modeling, all these different techniques, and you contribute with your data set, but your data set does not fly outside of your boundaries, so to say. I think that that's a very smart approach that many projects in Europe we are seeing that are adopting such an approach, and allows well, people such as Javier and his company to just be able to test the performance of their algorithms, and then all the contributors of data to take advantage of this. And with this, you preserve, I mean, the privacy and everything. So I think that we may have found a solution. So the European health data space should be some very big repository, as Paul was saying that he's against. I think that we, all of us, are against this, and that that's not feasible at all. But federations with normalized data that we can use to take advantage of this, I think that that's the solution that will help us overcome overcome the barriers of privacy, and at the same time remain being Europeans.
It's the balance between the possibility of using large sets of data without losing the control of your data. So it's kind of the mix, the perfect mix in that sense. It allows you to balance governance with use, and in that sense, it kind of solves this sort of conundrum.
So you bring the algorithms to the data and not to the data to the algorithms, so that this is the key part. I wanted to ask you also, Emma, in this sense, do we have the tools really that facilitate that process also in the secondary use of data? No? So we know we collect a lot of data for clinical purpose, but I mean, it's really adequate the tools for research so that we don't take so much resources and so long to the next drug development or the next medical product?
So I think clinical industry is ready for taking this kind of data, so our systems are prepared. And I would like to the point about data privacy, that it's not only, well, I completely agree that this is a very smart solution, but also technology and vendors bringing that technology on the market has already put in place some measures for guaranteeing these rights for the patients. So in fact, companies working globally, worldwide, they are taking that under consideration. Otherwise, they are losing market in Europe. And so the tools are there. So it's about to request that and put in place. And then in terms of collecting data and connecting data, clinical trials and the industry are ready for that. So it's just about, to make that kind of connection. So I think there is we are starting having experience on late phase trials to capture this data and to start doing, trials with this kind of data. But I really think that we, industry CROs, need to make the extra step and go further and try a clinical trial collecting this existing data. We are ready technologically, so it could be possible.
Yeah. So this is a call for industry to take the risk. Huh?
Indeed.
Okay. Let's see.
I would like to say something on this.
Yeah.
I mean, historically, clinical trials have been one of these sources of patient-related information silo creation. I don't know if that's something. I mean, it was very typical when you were hanging around the hospital, this certain physician being part of a clinical trial and having all the data to be collected in the context of the trial in an Excel sheet, in an Access database. Later on, this advanced a bit, and then they started collecting them centrally because the quality was awful, of course. This moved to these platforms, RedCap, whatsoever platform that now CROs and all these big trial management companies are using to just try to standardize the way you collect this data. Well, right now, I mean, this is still creating silos because this is still patient-related information that should be part of their medical record, so it should follow the patient, this data. And right now, because it was, I don't know, the symptoms, whatever, in a specific moment of this person's life. And it's interesting for the healthcare system to have it because, well, not for the healthcare system, for the patient, for this data to follow him or her. That's one thing. The second one that I wanted to say on this is that, well, of course, and I'm very happy with this, and Javier went into that before. Pharma companies, I think that they, as the main source of clinical trials, they have realized about this, and they are pushing very strong a standard, which is the OMOP standard. They have given a lot of money to plenty of fancy researchers all over Europe, the US, Australia, everywhere. And, well, it's really taking over for observational studies, and it's trying at the end to do the same, normalize this data, because they found out that it was not, well, the data that we were collecting, it had not enough quality, blah, blah, blah. I agree with this, and I am very happy that we are reaching an agreement with this in this layer for prospective observational studies in the context of clinical trials, but we need this data somehow to make it follow the patient and flow back into the healthcare system.
Well, if there is a way of using these standards, which is basically what we're trying to bring to the market, of using that standard, those standards, to allow a flow directly from the health record into the different softwares of CRF, etc., that are used in the clinical trials, that allows you to keep the data produced in a clinical trial within the boundaries of the hospital, and still it allows us to collect it for a clinical trial without a double data introduction by the professional. Mm-hmm. And that's precisely what it is about. So if we can standardize information within the hospitals, and we can do it with all the information, not just, let's say, the coded information from the hospital, also the unstructured part of the text, we can standardize all of that, and we can agree on a data standard such as OMOP, We can then link that through basically data extractions with the CRFs that are being used in the context of clinical trials, and therefore we are allowing researchers to collect the information without taking it out of the hospital and also without, let's say, losing it in the context of the trial. And therefore we are again breaking the barriers of the silos that are let's say, annoying in this sense.
So Javier, you mentioned, go ahead.
No, I would like to add to that piece that, in fact, ECRFs are collecting the existing data in the clinical history, in the medical records of the patient. Clinical trials are also adding extra tests to that, but in the same way that the ECRF can benefit of collecting this data, not double collect the data and clean again and invest double resourcing in that. In the same way, if we are this can be connected in two ways. So feeding ECRF and then getting back the other information that maybe is collected directly into the ECRF. So then if the standards are in place, it's win-win, I think, history.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think the data follows the mentality. We're talking about two silos, so what was clinical practice and clinical research, and I think, Paul, you're bringing the double loop here, which is a real-world data, how we integrate that into the whole chain. No? You will see it happen because we need this speed and we need to integrate, this real-world data in the clinical practice and also in the clinical research, no? As we said.
Yeah, and I believe there's also a dimension. We optimize what we measure, and if we don't measure it, we don't optimize it. And for example, in outcome research, there's 4 dimensions. There's mortality, there's morbidity, there's side effects, and what most people don't know, because our healthcare system in the last 50 years has failed to measure it correctly, is health-related quality of life. And if you ask patients, when they have to choose an intervention that they're not that sure about, what are they interested in, very often the doctor, according to the clinical guidelines, recommends and said, hey, I propose this kind of intervention, and you could expect that mortality, that morbidity, that side effects, and then the doctor stops talking. And the patients, they know, oh, there's a 4th dimension that we didn't measure in the clinical practice. In Germany, when new drugs are reimbursed, 100% of the papers, the studies handed in, have data on mortality and morbidity. Less than 20% have some data on health-related quality of life. And I guess our healthcare system, if we look at the life expectancy that we now have, was very good at managing mortality and morbidity. It was not very good at managing health-related quality of life because we're unable to measure it. And I guess that shows a little bit that also we should not only reinvent what we measured in the past, we should also think about what we measure. And it's not only that is in the clinic that happens, but also what happens afterwards, how it's actually affecting the patient.
Yeah, I think, this is what we just say, if you don't measure what is important, you make important what you measure, no? And I think it's really the quality of the patients, as we say. If that is important, then we have to be able to measure and integrate in our systems. I want to just ask the audience if there are questions, just please use the system and they will come to us, so we have a couple of minutes to ask also questions from the audience. So going back to this, what we measure is what we really need for our research purposes and for our clinical practice. So we measure all things.
I would say for clinical trials it is. So it's quite it's very costing to collect data for the clinical trials. So there is a protocol, and we stick to the protocol, and the costs are defined through the information that we need to collect through the protocol. So it's really clear what we need to collect in clinical trials.
Anybody?
Within the public sector and in clinical practice, similarly to the protocols, you have the clinical practice guidelines that suggest you how you should do your practice. But it's true that we could benefit from more data collection. We should be also careful, because we are asking healthcare professionals maybe too often to collect too much data, and we know that that's a reason for them to hate IT or to hate the EMRs and the digitalization in general. So I mean, right now we have, I think, this first wave, I would say, of medical records, which are the ones that transform the paper-based medical records into digital. I think that we need to evolve those for clinicians to spend less time collecting data. That's one thing with the public sector. The second thing is that I truly think that we could benefit, and I think that Paul touched in there the true point, which is we have forgot totally about the patient-related quality of life, or now everyone calls it PROMs, and everywhere you look, there are 20 projects on PROMs, which is at the end, specifically in this context, which is the best questionnaire for health-related quality of life. And that's an interesting dimension, because in here it's where we are introducing somehow the perspectives of the patient according to the specific treatment or situation, personal situation, without using the physician as a proxy to introduce this information. So it's information that you gather directly from the patient. We are working on this, and we see projects all around emerging on this, and that's I agree with him totally that that's an area that we need to improve a lot, because it will help us purchase the best medicines, decide on the best treatments, and at the end, health technology assessment agencies should use this information to decide on which is the treatments to be funded and which are not.
Yeah, definitely. I think we have a question from the audience. So
yes,
please go ahead.
Eva Turk is my name. Thank you so much for this panel. I was actually, Jordi, you answered in a way what I wanted to bring up, because when you said, like, with regard to health-related quality of life, the patient-reported outcomes and patient-reported experience measures is becoming more and more important in the health technology assessment part when it comes to reimbursement of the solutions. But for me, it's also then something on how can we actually then make all of this data collection transferred into useful information, into structured information that is there for the patients, for the health professionals, and maybe I missed it as part of the panel, apologies for that. But this is the part that kind of like, how can we make this data actually usable for the patients and the health professionals now, and what solutions are you thinking of in that way? Thank you.
Well,
you can say you're thinking about Iomed.
I mean, well, here I was telling you at the beginning that we were thinking about, or we are working on building this new electronic health record for Catalonia, which is longitudinal. It's aiming to break down all the silos of information that we have, but basically the very big silos that we have that are somehow splitting, historically have been splitting primary care from specialized care, from intermediate care, so the classical healthcare levels. The current systems that we have right now, as I was mentioning some minutes ago, respond to this first wave of digitalization, where we are basically translating the paper-based system into technology. Now, we are thinking that's not important. I mean, well, that's not important. Of course, it's important, but it's not the administrative process. I would say it's bringing what you are just saying, quality information to the point of care that will help the physician pick the best decisions at that moment. For this, we are thinking about, well, effectively implement clinical decision support tools that build on all this knowledge that we are gathering, and that now technology and people such as Javier and his company that are working on this are making this information or getting these insights available from all the data which is available. And really at the point of care, telling the physician, listen, okay, this guy, according to this multimorbidity indicator that you use, well, you have a lot of chances that it will become a huge consumer of resources, because when we compare his or her profile to the 2 million of people that have been in this situation before, they have had an exacerbation of the condition. So Really, it's being able to get all these insights of data into meaningful information that is useful at the point of care. And most of the EMRs that we currently have do not do that. They may have some sort of triggers and alerts, but they truly not do this clinical decision support really effectively implemented. And we want to build on that. I don't know if we will manage, but well, there's a growing base of companies that are working in this, and that we are very keen to work with them and to bring in their solutions into the system.
And answering, and a bit also answering on the question, there is two layers to this. On the one hand, we need to process the information, transform it from unstructured inputs into structured information. But then there's a second layer, which is transforming that structured information into meaningful outcomes. That's tricky as well. And that's something where we need to bring a lot of expertise into. We need to focus on particular use cases. We don't want to expect, to find absolutely a solution to absolutely everything in that information. But in any case, technology is ready for that. So in the first layer, which is the one we focus on, it's about basically, transforming text into structured information. That's what we're doing through natural language processing. That's the technique for this first layer. And then on top of that information, there's a variety of use cases. Of course, we need to find those ones that are meaningful. But then there is the second layer I was mentioning, which transforms data into actually meaningful outcomes that are either translated into directly the clinical practice, let's say on behalf of the clinician, or that is somehow translated directly to the patients through whatever apps or whatever systems we have to contact them.
Yeah, thank you, Eva, for the question. I think it brought back, the good closure of the debate, because we started about what can we do with the data, and you brought back also this purpose and used by the patients and clinicians. So in the end, the data is not what is important, it's really what we do with it. So just to close, I would like to ask each one of you just a headline, if you have one sentence just to close the panel. So maybe Emma, if you want to start this.
So yeah, I would like to go to my initial message that still there is a lot to do. I think, I really truly believe that investing or working together with the public health and private institutions, we can really make the difference for the patients in terms of data quality and bringing the best for the two worlds, I would say.
Well, I'd like to highlight the positive aspect on using information, on using data in healthcare. I think there is a lot of fear still around it, obviously through privacy, and it's obviously important to keep it, but we need to highlight the positive side of using the information, of using data, and a bit, do this counterbalance on the fear of using that information. So I really think that we need to transform the speech from a speech of caution and fear around data privacy into a speech of positivity around what we can achieve through this information. So it's definitely my last remark.
Cool.
Yeah, I'd say let's dare to rethink what we measure, and the best way of rethinking is starting asking the patients, patient association, and let's start asking the healthcare professionals, because very often they're asked to measure things that we don't really, or that they think are not needed, and they are not allowed to take the time to measure what they think is needed. And the same can be heard from the patient side. So my proposal would be to kind of think outside of the classical box and ask patients and doctors, even the very simple family doctors, they have a wealth of knowledge on what they would like to measure, on what they would like to base their decisions on, and then let's try to measure that as good as possible.
Jordi, if you want to close.
I would say that we've been spending massive resources on interoperability, and this has worked very well for us, and I still think that we should do such. But I think that we should also start thinking or focusing on what I call interoperability and deciding on a common ground of semantics to start working, rebuilding on top.
Good closure. So I think, I mean, the motto of this panel was making the most of the data to ensure best health outcomes. I think what we see is we are in a journey. We are working on it. There have been highlights and still some barriers that we have to confront. Probably is we are still talking about data is because we haven't solved everything. Normally, technology, we only talk about it when it's a problem. I mean, once you realize you have really reached that point where it's fully integrated, you don't talk about it anymore. So it's really just talking. Probably, hopefully, the next panel in the next year will be only about talking about best health outcomes, and then that will really be the meaning that we have solved these data aspects about it. So thank you very much for all the panelists. It has been really a pleasure for me also to be with you, and I hope the audience has also enjoyed the session, and I'll go back to you to close.
Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists. I would like to ask you to stay here just for a while because we will make of course, a family photo after your presentation. So, would you like to, well, stand or how would you like